ITA for calling out my boyfriend's family for changing the sleeping arrangement rules to favor his brother, and SIL. I, 24, have been in a relationship with my boyfriend Nathan, 26, for 6 years. This year, we made our usual Thanksgiving trip to his parents' house. For some background, Nathan has 3 brothers: Alex, who is single, Jack, who's married to Jill, and Luke, who's married to Millie and has a nearly 2-year-old. The family is scattered across different states, except for Luke and Millie, who live nearby. Nathan and I have the longest drive of anyone, a grueling 9-hour journey. Here's the problem we're facing. Nathan's parents, Mary and John, only have 2 guest bedrooms in their house. As you can imagine, with 3 couples visiting each year, someone always ends up on an air mattress placed between the 2 rooms. The first time I visited, I was told they'd rotate who gets the air mattress to keep it fair. But after 3 years of being the one stuck with it, we were informed that it would now be first come, first serve. Since Nathan's job doesn't give him much holiday time, we're almost always the last ones to arrive and inevitably end up on the air mattress. While this was annoying, we understood. It seemed like a logical system. However, this year was supposed to be different. Nathan and I had the entire week off from Monday to Thursday, and we were going to be the first to arrive. I was excited, so I decided to have a conversation with Mary about how we would finally get a bedroom. She laughed and said, "Yep, first come, first serve," which made me feel hopeful. Millie, who I've grown close to over the years, knew how excited Nathan and I were about this. She even decided to come early so we could hang out, and we had a plan where I would take the twin room and she would take the queen room. Now, here's where things get frustrating. On the day we left, I texted Mary our estimated arrival time. A few hours later, Millie texted me saying that Luke had spoken with Mary, and Mary had mentioned that Jack and Jill would be getting the queen room, while Luke and Millie would take the twin room, leaving Nathan and me stuck on the air mattress yet again. Luke called Mary out on this, reminding her of the first come, first serve rule. However, she suddenly claimed she had never said that and justified her decision by saying that Jack and Jill would be staying an extra day. For context, Jack and Jill were arriving a day later than us, so this reasoning didn't really make sense. When we arrived at Mary and John's house, Nathan brought up the first come, first serve rule once again. But Mary got defensive, insisted she didn't remember saying that, and refused to change her decision. At that point, I was beyond frustrated. I made several sarcastic comments because, frankly, it felt incredibly unfair. I pointed out how rules are only followed until they don't suit Jill, and how it was always first come, first serve, until it meant that Jill would have to sleep on the air mattress. I even mentioned how ridiculous it was for us to now have to board our dogs and drive for 8 hours before anyone else arrived, only to find out that the rules had suddenly changed. She had ample opportunity to bring this up in the many conversations we'd had in the lead up to our visit, yet she didn't. As she became more and more sassy about the situation, I started to feel defeated and honestly a bit targeted. So now I'm asking AITA for speaking up and feeling that Mary unfairly changed the rules to benefit Jack and Jill, while Nathan and I are always left with the short end of the stick? Update 1. After the tense conversation with Mary, I felt like everything had spiraled out of control. I couldn't understand why the rules we had followed for so many years were suddenly being changed so unfairly. Especially when every reason Mary gave seemed illogical, I felt increasingly disrespected and dismissed. Nathan, too, was feeling exhausted and disappointed. He had started to withdraw from the conversation, silently observing the situation, but I could clearly see the frustration on his face. We decided to temporarily let things go and continue with the family activities, although I couldn't shake the discomfort in my chest. But the issue didn't end there. Later that evening, when everyone was gathered around the dinner table, I could feel a clear sense of avoidance from Mary. She stopped talking to me, and instead, she gave quick glances in my direction, enough for me to sense her irritation. I couldn't just sit there while nothing was being resolved. Eventually, I knew I had to speak up once again. I stood up, deciding to go into the kitchen for some water, but I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. Mary was standing there, twisting a dish towel in her hands. I couldn't hold back anymore, so I said, "Mary, I think we need to have a clearer conversation about this. I don't understand why you changed the rules we had agreed upon. You've made us feel disrespected and unfairly treated." Mary turned to face me, her expression full of irritation, but she didn't say anything. We locked eyes, and the tension between us hung heavy in the air. I continued, my voice becoming more tense. "I'm not someone who likes to cause conflict, but I feel it's time to speak up about what's been bothering me. Don't think I don't understand when you come up with vague excuses just to defend your decision. And don't make me explain again what we've done to get here earlier than everyone else.
There was a long silence, and finally, Mary spoke, but her tone was cold.
You're not the one who gets to make decisions here. And I don't like the way you're criticizing me like this. I don't need to explain myself any further. At that moment, I felt a rush of disappointment and anger well up inside me. I knew that I couldn't just keep standing there and taking it. The tension between us wasn't just about who would sleep where anymore. It had become about the blatant disrespect. Mary had not only changed the rules, but also refused to engage in a fair conversation. When I returned to the living room, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Nathan noticed something was off and followed me. He looked at me with concern, but also with support. We sat down together, and I knew that no matter how tired I felt, I would have to continue facing Mary and her family. This situation couldn't keep being imposed on us without any clarity. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with thoughts, feeling as though I was being cornered, and I couldn't continue living in this unfairness. The next morning, I decided I was going to have an honest conversation with Nathan, and if necessary, I would stand up for our rights. Update 2. The next morning, as the sun rose, I couldn't sleep anymore. The feeling of unease and anger wrapped around me like an unrelenting storm. I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for things to change on their own. I needed to do something immediately. Nathan was still asleep, but I couldn't wait any longer. I decided to wake him up. We need to talk, I said firmly, surprising Nathan. He looked at me, his eyes a little confused, but then he recognized the seriousness in my tone. About what? Nathan asked, still not fully awake. I can't take this anymore. Today I'm going to face Mary. I can't let her keep treating us like this, I replied, my voice resolute. We can't keep allowing ourselves to be disrespected. Nathan looked at me for a moment, then sighed. He knew I had thought long and hard before making this decision, but he also understood that if I didn't do something, things would never change.
Are you sure? Nathan asked, worried.
I can't let this injustice continue. We have a right to speak up, and I don't want to watch this family keep pushing us around, I answered, my determination stronger than ever. We went outside, deciding to speak directly with Mary. As we entered the living room, I could feel the tension thickening in the air. Mary was sitting on the couch as if she had prepared herself for this confrontation. The whole family was gathered around the breakfast table, but their attention seemed to be focused on us. Mary, we need to talk, I began, my voice nervous but resolute. Mary looked at me, her expression unchanged, but I saw a glimmer in her eyes that seemed almost like a challenge. Is something wrong? She asked, her tone cold and defensive.
We came here early, and we were hoping that the first come, first serve rule would be respected, but it's clear that we haven't been given the same treatment as everyone else. I can't accept that just because Jill and Jack are arriving later, the rules are changed just to accommodate them, I said, frustration boiling inside me, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. We've put in the effort to arrive early, follow the rules, and we didn't expect to be treated like this. Mary was silent for a moment, then stood up and walked toward me. It felt like she was preparing to face me directly. I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this, Mary said, her voice slightly annoyed. This is just about the sleeping arrangements. Why do you have to blow it up? The issue isn't about the sleeping arrangements, Mary, I responded, my voice becoming more tense. The issue is about fairness and respect. We're not the only ones in this family, and we have a right to be treated fairly, just like everyone else. We've followed your rules all these years, but now, do those rules not matter anymore? At this point, the whole family fell silent, their gazes shifting from Mary to me. The entire space seemed to freeze, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Mary looked at me for a moment, then sighed, as if realizing that this conversation couldn't continue as usual. Fine, she said, her voice weak. Maybe I've done this wrong, but I don't think you'll understand. We just want to be treated fairly like the rest of the family, I said, the tension in my body starting to ease a little. We need to learn to respect each other more, not just in words, but in actions. Mary finally nodded reluctantly, and a few seconds later she said, Okay, I'll change the decision. You and Nathan can have a room to yourselves. Although not everything was resolved immediately, I felt like a weight had been lifted. Finally, we were able to stand up for what we believed was right. The feeling I had wasn't victory, but relief. And I knew this was just the first step in changing how we were treated in this family. Update 3. After Mary admitted her mistake and agreed to change her decision, the atmosphere in the living room seemed to calm down. While things couldn't completely go back to normal, at least I felt that I had stood up for myself and Nathan.
Although Mary didn't seem happy about having to change her decision, I knew this was an important step for the family to learn how to respect each other more. After the tense conversation, we returned to the living room, where the whole family was still having breakfast. Mary no longer had the defensive expression she had earlier. She looked at me, then at Nathan, and finally spoke up. "Well, I think we should come to an agreement on who will sleep where so everyone feels comfortable," Mary said, her tone less tense. "I'll rearrange the rooms to make it work." A sense of relief slowly spread through me. Hearing Mary say that made me feel that some of the tension in me was easing. However, I still couldn't deny that things couldn't return to normal immediately. But at least I had gotten what I wanted, fairness in how we were treated. The whole family began to discuss the arrangements again, and while the atmosphere was still somewhat awkward, I realized something important. This was a time for us to learn how to respect each other more, not only in small situations, but in the bigger picture. The feeling of speaking out and being heard truly brought me a sense of freedom and peace. Although I hadn't wanted to go through such tension, I didn't regret standing up. I understood that if I didn't defend my rights, nothing would ever change. And I also realized that even though it was difficult, conflicts in the family sometimes offer an opportunity for everyone to understand each other more, learn from one another, and grow together. We had a relatively peaceful evening afterward, and although the atmosphere was still a little strained, I knew we had overcome a challenge. Nathan and I felt closer than ever because we had faced this difficult situation together and held firm in our convictions. Mary, though not happy, had accepted the change and promised to try to respect fair requests in the future. Once everything settled, I sat down next to Nathan and he looked at me with a warm gaze. "Thank you for standing up," he said. "You did the right thing." I smiled, relieved. Not just for me, but for both of us. We deserve to be treated fairly. In that moment, I realized that family life is never easy. But if we're always ready to stand up for each other and fight for what's right, every challenge will become an opportunity for us to grow stronger. Update 4. After the tense confrontation, things gradually returned to normal, although the lingering tension hadn't fully subsided. It seemed that Mary had realized that fairness in how we treated each other was essential for maintaining harmony in the family, and she began to shift her thinking. The sleeping arrangements were adjusted, and we no longer had to worry about being treated unfairly. The next day, as the whole family gathered around the dinner table, the atmosphere became lighter. Although there was still some awkwardness, I could sense a significant shift in how everyone interacted with each other. Mary no longer had a defensive stance and seemed to realize that family relationships needed to be built on a foundation of respect and mutual understanding. That evening, we sat together, chatting and sharing funny stories just like we had before the conflict arose. A feeling of relief began to spread through me, and although things weren't always simple, at least I knew I had done the right thing by standing up for my rights. As everyone was getting ready for bed, I sat next to Nathan, his hand gently holding mine. He looked at me with a warm gaze and said, "You did so well. I'm proud of you." I smiled lightly, resting my head on his shoulder. We did this together. Nothing is more important than standing strong beside each other, right? Nathan smiled, hugging me tightly. We didn't need to say anything more, because we both understood that this was the moment we had overcome our biggest challenge. All the difficulties in family life were just stepping stones for us to understand each other better, love each other more, and most importantly, learn how to protect the values we believe in. Although family life is never easy, I've learned that sometimes moments of tension and conflict provide an opportunity for families to truly bond, for each person to learn how to respect and love one another in the most sincere way possible. And in the end, we found a way to walk this path together, stronger, more understanding, and loving each other more than ever.